Pretty inflammatory title up there, right? Let me explain. Now, last year's MacBook Air was in an awkward spot in Apple's laptop lineup. It wasn't Apple's thinnest and lightest computer. That title belonged to the regular MacBook, and it was only $100 away from Apple's entry-level MacBook Pro. Flash forward a mere 7 months later, and Apple's thinner and lighter MacBook is gone, and Apple dropped the price of the MacBook Air by $100 to $1,099 or $999 if you are a college student, making it again Apple's thinnest, lightest, and most inexpensive laptop. The design is still exactly the same as last year's 2018 model. It still has that iconic MacBook Air wedge shape. It still has just two Thunderbolt 3 USB-C ports, and it still has the headphone jack on the other side. And it still has the same Intel 8th generation dual-core i5 processor with a base clock speed of 1.6 GHz. It still has a 13.3-inch Retina display with a resolution of 2560 by 1600, giving it 227 pixels per inch. The speakers seem to be about the same as the 2018 model and the entry-level 2019 MacBook Pro. So they still have good, well-balanced, and loud sound. Wow, this sounds a lot like the 2018 MacBook Air. Are there any actual updates from the 2018 model to the 2019 model? Yes, there are a couple of updates. Now, the first update actually isn't an exclusive update to the 2019 MacBook Air. That is that it gets 400 nits of brightness. When the MacBook Air 2018 came out, the screen initially came in at 300 nits of brightness. Apparently, this was some sort of bug. Apple later patched this in an update, and that brought the screen brightness all the way up to 400 nits. So it's the same with this MacBook Air in 2019. The display gets up to 400 nits. Now, the biggest update to the screen itself is that this MacBook Air comes with Apple's Truetone technology that was not available previously on the 2018 version. And what Truetone does is it basically measures the ambient lighting environment around you, and then it will change the screen's color temperature depending on that lighting. And it acts a lot like a physical piece of paper. So if you're in a warmer lighting situation, the whites on your screen will look a little bit more yellow. And then if you're in a cooler lighting situation, the screen itself will be more blue. The Truetone display is the biggest outward-facing feature that the 2019 MacBook Air receives, and honestly, it's a small update, but it is a pleasant update. I do like the Truetone display a lot, especially if I'm reading websites with white backgrounds. I find that it's a lot more comfortable on my eyes than staring at a bluer screen. But other than that, this is still the same 13.3-inch Retina display from the 2018 model, and it still doesn't have the P3 wide color support like Apple's recently announced 13.3-inch entry-level MacBook Pro. But even without the P3 wide color support, it is still a good display. Text looks razor sharp on it, and videos still look really good. And for users who are not used to the P3 wide color spectrum on those other devices, maybe you won't miss having this color space. And honestly, it's a small thing. I think you'd probably have to have both laptops side by side opened up at the same time to notice the difference. And even then, to a lot of people, it would probably be a small difference, but I certainly do recognize it when I'm switching between my MacBook Air and my MacBook Pro. Now, besides from that Truetone display, there are two other updates to the 2019 MacBook Air that aren't really referenced. One of them is a positive, and one of them's actually the negative. So let's start with the bad news first. And the bad news is that the SSD solid-state storage inside of the MacBook Air is slower than the 2018 model. So the 2019 MacBook Air has about a 35% slower solid-state drive inside of it. Using the Blackmagic disk tool, I got a write speed of around 660 and a read speed of around 1260. So these are definitely slower than the 2018 model, and if you're wondering why these are slower, it probably has something to do with that $100 price cut we mentioned. Apple's probably using a lower cost SSD storage inside of this device. Now, don't get me wrong, the read and write speeds in the MacBook Air aren't slow by any means. It's not like it's using a spinning hard drive, and you probably wouldn't even notice it in day-to-day tasks, but it is something to be aware of. Now, the more positive change to the 2019 MacBook Air is that it includes Apple's 4th generation Butterfly keyboard. Apple doesn't actually call it the 4th generation Butterfly keyboard, it's still called the 3rd generation Butterfly keyboard, but this keyboard has the newer materials that came in the new 2019 MacBook Pros, and this is supposed to stop the stuck or repeating key issues that have faced the Butterfly keyboard. So the word is still out if this issue is fully fixed. These laptops with the new keyboards have only been on the market for a couple of months, so it's honestly a little bit too early for me to tell you if those issues have been fixed, but I haven't heard of any of the new 2019 MacBook Pros having the same stuck or repeating key issue as the previous generation Butterfly keyboards. One comforting thing about these new keyboards is that Apple is still including them in their repair program, so if your keyboard breaks within a 4-year period, Apple will replace it completely free of charge. So if you are worried about picking up the MacBook Air because of this keyboard, at least you have some peace of mind that if it breaks within a 4-year period, Apple will replace it. As for the keyboard itself, it still feels very similar to the 3rd generation Butterfly keyboard, so it has a softer typing experience, but it still has low travel, so the keyboard definitely isn't for everyone. I personally like the typing experience on the Butterfly keyboard, and the lower travel doesn't bother me. I actually find that I do type more accurately on it. But if you have no experience with the Butterfly keyboard, I would definitely recommend checking them out in the store before you purchase. Now, unlike the update to the MacBook Pro, which got a touch bar, the MacBook Air still retains its function keys. So I guess Apple is saying that the touch bar is a pro feature, and honestly, if you don't like the touch bar, this might be a positive for you. Now, although it doesn't include the touch bar, it still does include the Touch ID sensor, so it makes logging into your computer or other websites or applications super fast and easy. Okay, and those are the major updates to the 2019 MacBook Air. Like I mentioned before, it still has the same 1.6 gigahertz dual-core 8th generation Intel processor. So honestly, you could go ahead and watch my 2018 videos on the MacBook Air if you want to know more about its performance, but I'll cover it quickly here. So if you run a benchmarking app like Geekbench, you're getting a single core score of 4,276 and a multi-core score of 7,882. And this processor speed is definitely fine enough for everyday tasks like web browsing, watching videos, word processing, even doing things like light photo editing and light video editing. On top of that, it still has Apple's T2 custom chip inside of it, which can give you performance boosts for certain video codecs. So like I said, can this edit a video? Yes. Can it edit a photo? Yes. Can you even play a game like StarCraft 2 on low settings with 30 to 60 frames per second? Yeah, you can do all those things, but you really shouldn't be buying the MacBook Air with any expectation of stellar performance. Because if you plan to edit videos or photos or do music production, or even if you're a developer and you're writing code, I think your money is better spent on the entry-level MacBook Pro. It is an extra $200, but you're getting more than double the performance on that machine. And if you want to see my review of the entry-level 13-inch MacBook Pro, I will leave it up here in the description. However, with that being said, not everyone out there is a video editor or a developer, and there are times when buying the MacBook Air makes more sense. For example, you're getting around an additional 2 hours of battery life, around 10 to 12 hours on the MacBook Air. Where with my tests, I only got around 6 to 8 hours of battery life on the MacBook Pro. You're also getting a computer that runs on a much lower power chip, so that does have advantages. For example, I found that the MacBook Pro tended to heat up more as I was using it than the MacBook Air. So if I had my MacBook Pro on my lap for an hour, it could get a little bit uncomfortable, where with the MacBook Air, I had it on my lap for over 2 hours and I touched the bottom of it and it didn't feel really hot at all. Because it's not getting as hot, that also means that the fan inside of the MacBook Air doesn't have to spin as much as the MacBook Pro, so it's also a quieter laptop to operate. And it even has a small advantage in weight, weighing 2.75 pounds compared to the 3 pounds on the MacBook Pro. Now that isn't much weight, but if you are carrying that MacBook Air around with you all day, or if you're carrying it around while you're holding it in your hands, I think you can notice the difference slightly. Now, the most important part about the MacBook Air is that it retails for $200 less than that entry-level MacBook Pro. And again, that extra $200 might not seem like a lot of money to you. You might be thinking, maybe I should just spend that extra $200 to get that increased processor performance even if I'm not going to use it. But that's when my recommendations start to come in. So if you're saving $200 on a MacBook Air, you can put that money towards getting extra storage, which is something I highly recommend. The 128GB drive inside of the MacBook Air is quite low. In fact, the review unit I have has a 256GB drive. So you can spend the same amount of money and get a MacBook Air with a 256GB hard drive, where if you were buying the MacBook Pro, you would be only getting a 128GB, and then you would have to spend an extra $200 to get a 256, and then you're spending $1,500 on your computer, and as you can see, these costs start to add up. So if you don't need super high performance and you don't plan on using the CPU for intensive tasks like video editing, if you're buying this to browse the web, watch videos, email, word processing, spreadsheets, just everyday laptop things, then it works fine on those tasks. So like the video title says, the MacBook Air is great, but should you buy one? Well, just like I concluded my 2018 MacBook Air review, this product doesn't live in a vacuum. With software updates like iPadOS on the horizon that expand the capabilities of an iPad even more, you might want to pick up something like an iPad Air, which alone retails for about half the price of the MacBook Air and actually has better performance. And I think a lot of the tasks that people would do on a MacBook Air can also be done really well on an iPad Air. Again, if you need CPU power, I would point you more towards the direction of the entry-level 2019 MacBook Pro. Even if you are interested in picking up a MacBook Air, I might also point you in the direction of picking up last year's 2018 MacBook Air, which has better SSD speed. Sure, it doesn't have the Truetone display, but if you don't mind that, you can find a refurbished MacBook Air on Apple's website for just $850. And hey, I'm not even saying the 2019 MacBook Air is a bad laptop, because it's not. But there might be other options out there that might fit your workflow better. However, the MacBook Air is beloved for a reason. It's a solid laptop with good battery life, it's more comfortable to use, and it runs Mac OS. And for those people with a lighter workload who still want a traditional laptop that runs Mac OS, it is still a great option. But anyway, that's what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What do you think of the 2019 MacBook Air? If you're interested in buying a MacBook Air and you want to support the channel, considering buying from the link in the description, it helps the channel out. As always, if you like the video, make sure you give me a like. If you want to see more from this channel, make sure you're subscribed. And as always, I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.